Here we go. We are apparently live. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to Intelligent Disclosure. I'm Richard Dolan with my wife, Tracey.
Hi.
We're happy to be back.
Yes.
We were
on hiatus there.
Well, we didn't do this last week.
Right.
But what people don't know is that I just, wallowed around the house in my bathrobe all day and
As if.
I didn't do anything.
Although we can work from home, so we're pretty lucky.
We are.
Right?
We are lucky.
Yeah. Before we start, I'm changing the subject. Can you tell? Before we start, we just want to give a shout out to the chat family. We see you guys. We see 3D the Destroyer put out Dolan Knights Assemble.
Yeah.
Which always makes us laugh when we're getting ready. So thanks to you guys. You always come with such good spirits, and it's really great to see you all. So
For sure. You wanted one or two, and I know that is kind of funny.
it is.
You wanted
It's
one or
great.
two announcements before we started on our theme for tonight.
Yeah, basically all it was we are going to be doing a last event in Manchester that we just found out about. And it's a small group, but it's
Right.
open to the public. And it is December 7th. We will post something on our website calendar about that probably tomorrow.
Yeah, check our website and look for the calendar. We'll have details
under
on it.
events. Yeah.
It's a one-day thing.
4 hours.
I'll be doing something. Tracey will be doing something. Steve Mera over in the UK, who's a great guy, he'll be doing something. And it's a one-day thing.
Yeah.
So we'll have details about it, but yeah, why not a trip to the UK
That's
at
right.
the last minute?
So if any of you are around, come on out and say hello. So that'd
You
be
bet.
great.
Absolutely.
But that's it. We have an interesting case to talk about. Lots of people have talked about it in the past, but this is still an ongoing
Well,
missing person case, essentially.
it is, and it's a tragic case. It's not just an ordinary UFO case. And this is the disappearance of Frederick Valentich from October 21st, 1978 over Bass Strait in Australia. And this is a really well-known UFO event. Particularly, a lot of Australian researchers have gotten into this in a very, very deep way. But it's of interest. It's of interest around the world, and it's a tragic story. And so I would like those people who are directly connected to Fred Valentich, his family, his girlfriend from many, many years ago, Rhonda
Rushton.
I just want them to know, like, we're with you. Like, we really, I personally, I feel it. I think you feel it. It's a horrible tragedy. But it's also, it's a bizarre mystery. Like, there are odd things about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to try to explore this and also, like, not pretend to solve it.
Right.
Can we just not do that? Because
Right.
one thing you notice, like, there's podcasts out there, there's websites, and there are people who look at this case, and does it strike you? It strikes me as arrogant that someone's going to come to this case 40 years now, 41 years after the fact, and they're like, oh yeah, I've got this solved. No one else is smart enough in the past to figure this out, but I'm going to tell you just exactly how it went down. I'm like,
right.
Can you be any more arrogant than that? And frankly, the explanations, and we're going to go over some of those, are not well thought out. Like, many of them were easily disproven. And the ones that haven't been disproven are still, like, really a stretch, I think, when you start looking into it.
Yeah.
So we'll get into all of that. That's not to say that this is a UFO that took Fred Valentich. I mean, the fact is we don't know what it was.
Right.
But it's bizarre. And we've got the transcript, and we'll talk about that as well. But I think, can I just read the transcript when we get up to it?
I think we should.
Right.
I think we should. Yeah.
And there's a lot more. There's a pseudo recording of this on YouTube.
Well, I think
Right.
there are lots. I think there are several recreations that were done because people don't want that transcript to go away. But one thing we know about that transcript, the original one, was that it is the one that was released originally
Back in 1982.
was edited. So there was never a full version ever given out. So that in itself is something of interest.
Yeah. Do we know how much? Can you just tell the story of this? Because you actually were, Tracey was diving into this as much as I was in the last couple of days and actually weeks. We were going to do this case months ago.
Yeah.
And then it just kept getting moved over for other things. But
I know.
So we've actually been looking at this for a while, and each of us has looked into different elements of it.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us what you found out about that.
Well, I want about which part?
The edited aspect of the transcript.
Well, let's see. What ended up happening, I wanted to bring this up later, but someone who you all know probably, or if you don't, you might want to, Micah Hanks actually interviewed Rhonda Rushton.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got a couple of interviews out there as well. But he spoke to her, and she had said a couple of years after the case, one of the original investigators, who she said sort of, it was a real interrogation at the time, but she had told her that, or had implied that the original transcript was edited and that there may have been some audio missing from the end, where we now know that there is 17 seconds of this metallic sound. So I want to bring this up later after we go through the whole case. I'll talk about it some more.
I have no idea where that original audio is, by the way. Like, you look for it on YouTube. It's not on YouTube. I don't know where this exists.
Yeah. Why is that missing?
Yeah.
Is an interesting question.
Well, let's get into it. I'm going to share the screen here with you guys. This is a young Fred Valentich. This is around the time of his disappearance. He was 20 years old. And just look at that.
He's a very mature looking 20-year-old. I think we can all agree with that. Absolutely.
I mean, it's not that there aren't such mature looking young people today, but there's something about maybe it's that generation. I don't know what it was, but he's certainly is a very serious looking young man. And what we know about him is that he was a very dedicated young aviator. He wasn't experienced. He wasn't extremely experienced, but he at the time of his disappearance, he had about 150 flight hours under his belt. It's not a whole lot. But here's the thing with Fred Valentich. So he was 20 years old. He was piloting a Cessna 182 light aircraft, and I think here's Fred, looking a little more like a young guy here with his plane. This is a modern photograph of a Cessna 182. Here's another one. So his plan was to take it from Melbourne, as they say it in Aussie land.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was going to fly it to King Island and then return. And the airport he was at was Moorabbin Airport. This was, so here's Melbourne where he was. He was going to fly out to Cape Otway here, to King Island and back. And here, in fact, is about 100 miles here, and then another 70 to King Island and then back. That's the basic idea. And what happens is that very early on, after he reaches Cape Otway here, about 40 minutes into his flight, he turns this way, and a few minutes after that starts seeing unusual things. The entire encounter that he has with this unknown object is only about 6 or 7 minutes. And you got a very eerie transcript. I'm going to read it, suggesting a UFO. There's no question about that when you read through it. Fred his body was never recovered. There was wreckage. We learned about this from Keith Basterfield, who found the what was called the lost government papers on this. He does really, really excellent research. So much, Keith Basterfield. Anyway, he found that the wreckage, there was wreckage found about 5 years later, in 1983, of a Cessna that had matching partial serial numbers. But that's not a confirmation it was the same plane, and Frederick's body never was found. So this, did you want to say something about that?
No, yeah. I was just, I saw a comment that I wanted to hang on to.
All right, great. So this was investigated by the Australian Department of Transport. Let me just take this screen off here. We don't need this. And they were not able to determine why he disappeared. And in the aftermath of this, we learned, or actually it it turned out that there were quite a few UFO reports at that time. There are people who retroactively reported them, but there are also a lot of people who reported them beforehand.
Oh, that's
well,
right. They reported
region.
up to calls coming in up to 6 weeks before this, and that they were increasing to a point where their phones were ringing off the hook leading up to this time.
Yeah.
Now, do we want to talk about the other things that were going on at the time? I mean, there was a meteor shower.
Yeah, well, we can get into that. I mean, there was a meteor shower going on at that time, but how you want to think? How about we get into the case and we'll deal with the whole meteor shower possibility.
Yeah, let's talk about that after. There's so much.
There's a lot going on here. So anyway, young Fred Valentich. We'll go back to the picture of this young man. Yeah. He's a cool-looking guy. He's 20 years old, so he's still living with his parents and his family. He's working as a shop assistant at an army disposal store. He was in high school till grade 10, but then he continued his studies at a private college. Not really sure how that was working out, but that seemed to work against him because he 2 times applied for enlistment in the Royal Australian Air Force. He wanted to be a flyboy. That was his dream, and he was rejected because apparently he didn't have the educational qualifications, and maybe his high school situation has something to do with that. I don't know. But he was very, very active as an aviator, at least very motivated, we could say.
Yeah, he was very active. He was very passionate about it.
Right. He wanted to have a career in aviation.
And according to his brother, he was very sort of conscientious about it.
Right.
He's been portrayed as otherwise, but he was very concerned about not having any blemishes on his record.
He did a couple of enthusiastic things. So he got his student license when he was 18. He got his private license at age 19, and he would take his, he would fly. He got in trouble for intentionally twice flying into a cloud.
Right.
Because he just felt like doing it,
Right.
And on one time, I think he inadvertently flew into airspace that was like a controlled zone in Sydney, and he got a warning for that. So these are used against him by people later, saying that he wasn't a serious pilot. But I just take that as someone who was very motivated and enthusiastic.
Right. And, again, when you listen to things from Rhonda Rushton, who was his girlfriend, and his brother, Richard, you know that he was very serious about flying, even though they've given these reports making him sound bad.
Yeah, right.
He was very serious about it. Apparently, a lot of people don't realize this, but Rhonda used to go up flying with him quite often. And she said, he would do all these fun maneuvers.
Right.
And but his brother did stress that, he was very serious about flying. He took it very, very seriously. It was very important to him. So that's just important to know, because a lot of the reports paint him in a totally different light as irresponsible.
It's really true. And the whole UFO connection is also brought up, he was a fanatic about UFOs. And this still comes up as an explanation today. But you were looking into this, and that wasn't really what you discovered. Not really.
That's right. I just want to say this too. I was listening to a podcast of Micah Hanks about this. A great one to check out. He does the Graylian Report. And he was making this very clear distinction. All of these skeptics have gone after this case, but whenever they do, they never, ever once have talked to the people who were personally involved with him. Ever. They don't take that into consideration. So there's this clear demarcation between the skeptics and the people who were actually involved. And so that's just important to keep in mind as we
so he was more
look at this.
Apparently he was interested in UFOs, but it wasn't like he was a fanatic about them, that type of thing.
Okay, so about UFOs, when Micah talked to Rhonda about that, and he said, how interested in UFOs was he? Because, they're portraying him to be a UFO nut, crazy about UFOs. And she said, no, not particularly. He had this one book, Chariot of the Gods, which was
which everyone in the world had.
That's
back
right.
At that
it
time.
Was a bestseller at the time, and even if you weren't totally into UFOs, Micah makes this point. You might have read it anyhow.
Right.
But he pressed her on this, and she said, no, not particularly. It wasn't it wasn't how they portrayed it at all. So it's interesting to hear.
Yeah. It is really, but you can see that there's like an agenda. At least it seems to be an agenda, or at least people come in with preconceptions about what they think happened, and you really get the idea that this colors their approach to the case in general.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you found some of that.
Yeah, he asked Rhonda how many of these skeptics or these investigators on that side of things ever have interviewed you, and she said none.
Not one.
Not
Wow.
one.
Wow, it's been
Not
40
one.
years.
And so he had actually asked her to marry him. And he had an engagement ring on layaway. And there are a lot of people that say, we'll talk about this later, that it was a suicide mission. But I mean, there was a lot going on there.
Everyone around him, from what I at least learned, he seemed like a happy guy. He was, I'm sure, frustrated because he wanted to move faster with his aviation career.
He did. He wanted to be a commercial pilot. He was excited about it. He wanted that. He didn't want anything to tarnish his record towards that. You know, that was a big deal. And they all talk about this. So,
yeah. Okay. So we're up to October 21st, 1978, and he's at Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne. And
I'm sure we're not saying that right.
Of course not.
Mark H. How do you
doing
say
the best? Melbourne.
That we know.
He had a stated intention, according to the records, that he was going to fly to King Island in Bass Strait. And again, here's the map of that via Cape Otway, which is right here at the tip. And in fact, let me just show you. This is from some other site. They put this together, nice little graphic. Fly along the coast, and then boom, this way. And so that's what happened. So he leaves at 6:19 p.m. All of the sources give military time, so I'm going to skip the military time. He leaves at 6:19 in the evening, and he goes all the way down the coast, and by 7 p.m., he apparently reached Cape Otway. I say apparently because one thing you learn in looking into this is that there's no radar plotting of Valentich's plane. So that's the assumption, but according to everything that he said, apparently that's where he was. Now, there was another thing that was brought out as a critique of him, which was simply that he said he was going to pick up passengers, but that he had told his family and his girlfriend that he was going to pick up crayfish at King Island. Turned out that during the accident investigations, that there were no passengers waiting to be picked up on King Island, and there was no crayfish available at that time. Like, in other words, if you'd called ahead to buy any, you wouldn't have been able to, apparently, because they weren't available. So what is that? Does it mean did he just want to fly?
Well,
what is it?
Yeah.
Does it mean anything at all? I mean, that's used as a mark against him. At least it seems to be. And I don't really see why that's
I was listening to an interview with Andrew Arnold, who I believe is a part of VUFOA. I don't know. It's basically Victoria UFO Action, which is, I don't think they're functioning anymore, but it's a UFO group, or it was, in Victoria, in Australia. And he was basically saying, they spent hours interviewing Rhonda and the family and everybody else, and they've been looking at this for a long time. And I believe it was a 2014 interview. He had said, to Micah, I think at this point, we actually believe that he didn't really have any intention of going to that island, that he just really wanted hours. He had an exam coming up, and he wanted to get back. He and Rhonda had this whole dinner plan. She had bought a new outfit. They were celebrating their anniversary, and he just wanted to get back. But this was just, he really, really wanted hours. And so he thinks that the crayfish story and the extra people was just sort of something that he might have said in passing to someone. It was just like telephone, people
I could
just
easily believe that.
Took off with that.
He's 20 years old.
Yep.
Like, honestly, because anything could be possible.
Well, people say that one of the major criticisms is that if he was going to land on King Island, he never notified anyone so that they would light up the
The runway.
So that he could land. But it really sort of seems like he didn't seem to care about that. All of his plans were at home after with what he was going to do. They had plans to see family. They had plans for this nice dinner.
Oh, and isn't it true? Like another critique of him was that he left so late. It was already getting dark, or it was going to get dark.
Yes.
But you have something that you learned about that. He was going to go with.
That's right. They say, something was wrong with him. Maybe he was staging something because he left later and everything was off kilter.
Mhm.
But according to Rhonda, he left. She made him late. They were going to fly together
as they had done a number of times before.
That's right. But she was working, I think, for a pharmacist. I'm not sure if that's completely right. But she was working and she was running late and he was waiting for her. And she couldn't get a ride at that time, this later time, to the airport. So she actually made him late. So there's a lot of things that...
Yeah, so like if he's going to be staging a disappearance, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because that's been another thing that was laid against him. Like he just tried to fake his own death and stage a disappearance.
Right.
Really? Like he's planning to go with his girlfriend.
Right.
And it only didn't happen at the last minute because she couldn't do it.
Right. That's right.
So,
well, So,
and the same even with the suicide, frankly.
Right. Well, a suicide seems crazy. I mean,
there's no logic.
I don't know. He was getting engaged, he seemed like he had things together. He, sometimes he knew what he wanted to do in life. You don't typically see that when you have someone who knows and is excited about all these different aspects of their life, relationship, and he knows what he wants to do. He knows what he wants to be.
Exactly.
So he doesn't sort of fit the bill for that.
He had a nice, he was looking forward to a great career. He had a girlfriend. Yeah. He was 20 years old. Everything seemed fine.
But the initial investigation by the papers and the government really portrayed him as sort of this loner. He didn't like to go out. He was sort of this antisocial guy. But when Micah asked Rhonda about that, she said, when they originally were investigating, it was really like an interrogation, and when she read the report, she said it didn't really reflect the things that they had said. It was really bent in this certain way. And that's not how they meant things. They really sort of made up this story because she said he was very social. Whenever he went out, he was very well dressed. He loved to talk to people. They really sort of were building on a story.
Yeah.
Later, she said in an interview that the media just wasn't willing to listen to the truth. And I think that says a lot.
The truth being?
The truth, the statements she was making about him, they were just ignoring
that he was well-adjusted, happy, all of that. Yeah.
So.
All right, well, let's go back to our story here. And in fact, so he reaches Cape Otway around 7 p.m. And I just plotted this mess. I don't really know exactly how far he went. I was trying to do my own best estimate here.
I saw some maps and that's pretty close.
Okay, so
to the maps I looked at. Yeah.
He has his first observation. He begins reporting to Melbourne. I'm going to read the transcript any moment at 7:06. And it's about 6 or 7 minutes later that they lose all contact with him. So it's a really short period of time. And it all happened somewhere right around here. So this is someone else's map. I'm not sure really why they have him doing this kind of topsy-turvy, turning around. So I probably shouldn't have even included that. I want to read you this transcript. And by the way, like on YouTube, there's an alleged recording of Valentich, but of course it's not him. It's done by an actor. There is not an authentic recording of him on the web that I've been able to find. We haven't been able to find it. So rather than just play something fake, I'm just going to read this out. It's a fascinating transcript. And as Tracey mentioned, it appears to have been edited in some manner. But here we are at 7:06 now.
Well, I just want to clarify that. Yeah. Everyone knew that what they were given was edited. Like no one got a full original transcript. But when this original investigator found Rhonda a couple years later, he seemed to be insinuating more than that, as though some of the dialogue from the very end was taken out. So
right.
I just wanted to clarify that.
That's a very good point. Here's what we have. Valentich at 7:06 says, Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. That's the name of his plane. Is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet? Steve Roby, who was over at Flight Services in Melbourne, he's the guy that Fred is talking to.
Air traffic control.
Air traffic control. He says, no known traffic. Valentich says, seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000 feet. And Roby says, what type of aircraft is it? Valentich replies, I cannot affirm. It is 4 bright, and it seems to me like landing lights. So we'll go on here. The next major statement, now we're at 7:07. We're just a little more than a minute into this. And Valentich once again says, Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. The aircraft has just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above. And Steve Roby says, Roger. And it is a large aircraft, confirmed. He's asking for Fred's confirmation of this. Valentich says, unknown due to the speed it's traveling. Is there any Air Force aircraft in the vicinity? And Roby replies, no known aircraft in the vicinity. Now we're at 7:08 p.m. And Fred Valentich says, Melbourne, it's approaching now from due east towards me. Open microphone for a couple of seconds. Let me move on to the next slide here. And then the next thing that we have is Fred Valentich, still at 7:08. He says, it seems to me that he's playing some sort of game. He's flying over me 2-3 times at speeds I could not identify. I just want to stop right there. Flying over him repeatedly 2-3 times. And I want to return to that when we're done with this, when people start saying, he's confused over, he doesn't realize he's flying upside down. That's not acceptable as an explanation anymore. Or he is circling around without realizing it. Like
he's misinterpreting. These are the stars.
There's no
These
way.
Are planets.
Yeah. There's no way to get that when you are really reading his transcript. I would say. So I just wanted to mention that. So Roby asks, Roger, what is your actual level? What's your altitude? And Valentich says, I'm at 4,500, 4500. That's 4,500 feet. Roby says, and you confirm that you cannot identify the aircraft. And Valentich says, affirmative, I cannot identify the aircraft. Roger, stand by. We'll move on to the next slide here. Is that right? There we go. Now we're at 7:09. And Valentich mentions again, he says, Melbourne, Delta Sierra Juliet, it's not an aircraft. It is, you have an open microphone for 2 seconds. And Roby shoots back, he says, can you describe the aircraft? And Valentich says, Delta Sierra Juliet, as it's flying past, it's a long shape. Another few seconds of an open microphone. Cannot identify more than it has such speed. It's before me right now, Melbourne. That's a very dramatic moment right there, for sure. Roby says, Roger, and how large would the object be? He's asking this again, and Fred just says, Melbourne, it seems like it's chasing me. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me also. It's got a green light and sort of metallic-like. It's all shiny on the outside. And Roby, I'm sure, is wondering, what on earth can I do here? And Valentich then shoots back. We're now at 7:10. So we've been in this for a little more than 4 minutes. And he just says, it's just vanished. Melbourne, would you know what kind of aircraft I've got? Is it a military aircraft? He's asking again. Roby just says, please confirm the aircraft just vanished. Valentich apparently cannot hear him. He says, say again, is the aircraft still with you? Says Roby. And Valentich says it's now approaching from the southwest. So a different direction than from previously. And we're now getting very much toward the end. It's approaching 7:12 p.m. Valentich says, here we are. The engine is rough idling. I've got it set at 23, 24, and the thing is, and apparently he said coughing. Roby asks Valentich, Roger, what are your intentions? What are you going to do? Valentich says, my intentions are to go to King Island. He says, Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It is hovering, and it's not an aircraft. And then that's it. We have, he says, Melbourne, an open microphone for 17 seconds. And this is followed by a 17 seconds of this unidentified noise, people have described it as like a metallic scraping sounds.
You have a more detailed account of that, right?
All contact was lost.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. You have a more detailed analysis from a researcher, a U.S. researcher, about that last 17 seconds and that sound. I remember you were telling me earlier
I'm
today.
trying to remember. I don't know if I have that.
I know you said it was a researcher who I wasn't familiar with in the U.S. who listened to the audio of that, and they said it was a pulsing. They gave an analysis about it.
Well, things fall out of my head at a rapidly alarming rate.
Darn, I thought it was really good.
Yeah, we do a lot of this show. Sometimes we plan things and sometimes we wing it. That was winging it. And I actually don't remember that. If you know it, put it in the comments below and we'll take a look at it. So I can't remember.
Yeah, two researchers, one in Australia got the
I'm sure
audio,
this is true.
and one in the US got the audio. And
this is why I need you. You remember these things better than I do.
Yeah, except that I thought you had it somewhere, so I didn't write it down.
Nope.
Oh, I thought that was going to be so interesting. Yeah.
Well, it probably is. So there you go.
Okay.
What I can say is that it was immediately upon Valentich losing contact that they started a search and rescue operations. It's had to be very dramatic for Steve Roby to get this. So they started it right away, and it went for 4 days. You have sea and air search by Australian Air Force aircraft, 2 aircraft searching. There was a fuel slick that was roughly where Valentich had last reported back. And the question is, was this from his aircraft? Turns out, no, this was not aviation fuel. So there was no trace of the aircraft. Now, I mentioned Keith Basterfield earlier. Many years later, Keith was able to review the long, I think it was a 315-page government report. And he stated that there were parts of aircraft wreckage with partial matching serial numbers to Valentich's Cessna that were found in the Bass Strait 5 years later, so 1985. But as we were talking about earlier, that's just apparently that's a match to the type.
That's right.
Of his
that's what I had read.
Was rented.
The type it was a match to the type of craft in that fleet that were able to be rented out to people now. And
it could be his aircraft.
Yeah, but so Steve Roby, the air traffic controller, who's also a pilot, was asked about this, and he said he does not believe it was from his plane because it was found so far away. He said if it was found anywhere closer, then he might believe it. Yeah, but that was his opinion.
Yeah, and you've got everyone saying, well, Currents could have taken it, but I would go with Roby's.
I would go. He's very familiar with the area.
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
a pilot himself, and that was his job, working that area. So I think that we need to take that into consideration. Right. You know, his opinion on that.
Now, meanwhile, before that, in 1982, the Australian Department of Transport, their DOT, investigated this case. They couldn't find a cause of the disappearance, except they presumed it was fatal. And they did a report on this in 1982. One of the things about those unexplained sounds at the very end. That's 17 seconds of this metallic scraping sound. This recording was sent to a couple of researchers, Paul Norman and John Auchetti, got an edited copy of the original voice tape, an edited copy. You really got to ask, like, why?
Was it edited?
Why is this edited?
I know.
Seriously.
Well, yeah, I mean, that there are a lot of things here indicating
it's a missing person case.
Right. That everything's been tampered with for some reason.
It's a very bizarre thing.
It is.
Yeah. So
I feel like you're about to give the information I was looking for here.
Well, so Auchetti had a copy analyzed at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. That's RMIT. And then another copy was taken to the US for analysis by Dr. Richard F. Haynes.
That's it. That's who I was looking for.
Richard Haynes.
Yes.
Oh, well, Haynes' analysis of that.
There we go.
It was a pulsing sound.
Yes.
Well, yeah, Haynes did talk about this. But I just assumed you meant someone like that I had personally talked to.
No.
I did not talk to Richard Haynes about this.
No, but you told me about the analysis. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all good. So Richard Haynes is an amazing guy. A great researcher. In fact, for the record, here's a little fun fact. As far as I can tell, it was Richard Haynes who devised the acronym UAP, which is now everywhere, unknown aerial phenomena. Back, I think in 1980 or so was when I believe he developed that acronym. And now, of course, that's become very, very widespread just over the last few years, and particularly now with the U.S. Navy. But anyway, this is Richard Haynes. He worked.
Can I just ask you, because Peter Maxwell Slattery, is he one of the other people? One of our people in chat is mentioning that name. So I just thought I'd bring it up to you.
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
We should bring in really some of the Aussie investigators of this. They're the true experts
if
here.
We have more time, we have lots of people who we could have called on. We didn't have the time.
This is an interesting case for me, for you. And we have got an interest in it, but there are people who've really been dedicating, years to this. But anyway, Haynes looked at this. Haynes was a researcher with NASA Ames Institute over in California. He was a professor of psychology at San Jose State University. He's very, very excellent researcher. So he did describe these sounds. And I didn't get where he was talking about a pulsing sound, but he did describe them as 36 bursts. There were 36 separate bursts with what she described as a fairly constant start and stop. I guess you could say pulses. Yes.
That's the way I interpreted what you said. What they said.
So he did actually describe that. So
36 bursts. I mean, that's just kind of interesting.
And he said there was no particular pattern or frequency that was noticeable.
Oh.
So it wasn't like like there was not a pattern according to what he said.
Okay.
But no one's ever been able to figure out what these sounds were from or what they represented.
Well, it's good to have that additional information because typically it's only described as a metallic scraping sound. There's never usually any more detail than that. So I just thought that was important to add.
I just want to share this screen here. This is I was looking for screens of twilight over the ocean because this is probably similar to the sky that Fred Valentich was looking at the time of his disappearance. And I looked up the sunset times over at Cape Otway in 1978. They were very close. They were a week away from daylight savings time, which happened a little more than a week later. So it's easy to get screwed up here, but sunset at that time was at 6:50 p.m. around the time that Fred was flying. Like he reached Cape Otway actually at 7 p.m.
Okay.
And then you get twilight, which is really what we're looking at here. This is twilight.
I just want to add to this.
7:16. So he was probably seeing this sky.
As we're looking at this, I just want to add, because, this really comes into play when we hear what the skeptics were saying that he was possibly seeing, or according to them, what he was seeing. But the conditions were apparently clear.
Yeah. Right. I
So,
probably had too many clouds even there, but he had clear weather and like no significant winds.
right. I just think that's really important to
Right.
note as we go through what the skeptics said, which
Absolutely.
I think you are planning to do at the end.
By the way, here's a couple of the newspaper headlines that we just pulled out. UFO mystery. And then you've got this. This is Fred's dad, Guido Valentich, and one of Fred's younger brothers. And there's a picture of Fred, and it's obviously very tragic.
Yeah,
very
that's his
sad.
younger brother, Richard.
Now, this is a photograph that was taken. I just want to talk about this. This was done by a man named Roy Manifold. He was a plumber. And this is over at Cape Otway around the time of the disappearance. Apparently, according to Manifold, this picture was taken at around 6:47 p.m. So just before everything was happening. And he wanted to set up time-lapse photos. He set up a time-lapse camera and a tripod on the shore. He wanted to get a photograph of the sun setting over the water. And that's a very pretty picture, actually. When the pictures were developed, and this is the only one I've been able to find, they seem to show a fast-moving object leaving the water near the Cape Otway Lighthouse. The time that he gave was about 6:47 p.m. It's just about 19 minutes before Fred reported the problems that he was having. And I just want to show, this is a close-up of whatever this object is. So it's a very bizarre looking thing. Now there's another site that even had a higher, I don't know if this was touched up or not, but take a look at this. I'm not sure what this little white dot here is, but whatever you got going on, like the shape of this is very bizarre. And skeptics again just say this is a cloud formation, but what kind of cloud formation could that be? Frankly, it doesn't make any sense to me. That the images were studied, at least at the time. I don't know if anyone has done a revised study of this, or even where the photographs are, or how many there are.
Can you put it back up while we the not that one, but the other one?
Yeah, I'll do the
where you showed in context while you describe it. Yeah.
So an organization that was very big in the UFO field, big at the time, called Ground Saucer Watch, GSW, they're out of Arizona. They get the pictures. They were one of the only groups at the time actually to have a computer and to do some version of computer enhancement of photographs. Their methods, honestly, they were not correct all the time in my estimation, but they were the top of the line at the time. Anyway.
What do you mean when you say they were not correct? Who are you talking about?
Well, they did, like they had early versions of looking at emboss effects and like trying to look at a photographic image in different ways.
I see.
To look for things that you wouldn't necessarily recognize in just looking at it visually. They did a lot of photographic analysis back at that time.
Okay.
But so they couldn't identify the object, but there was definitely an argument by looking at the multiple frames that the object was moving at around 200 miles per hour. And again, I apologize for not having, I'm sure there are other images, other pictures that are available. I just wasn't able to acquire them for this particular live stream. So I'm just going to have to go on the trusting nature of the analysis. They had a couple of images, and their estimate is that the object was moving at about 200 miles per hour. Right. So if that's the case,
that's at a normal speed, but it's definitely ruling out a cloud. It's definitely ruling out a balloon.
It's a normal aircraft speed. It's a kind of a quick. I mean, Fred's Cessna could not do that speed. He could max out at about 150, 160 miles per hour. Now, Richard Haynes over at Ames at NASA did write about this photograph as well. And he just said, based on the computerized data of these pictures, it is the consensus that the images represent a bona fide unknown flying object of moderate dimensions, apparently surrounded by a cloud-like vapor exhaust residue. So, you know, he believes it was a solid object. UFO skeptics have said, no, it's just a cloud formation. And as someone has pointed out, none of the skeptics were able to debate or give an account for the speed that the object apparently seems to have been going. I guess they could just say, well, we don't accept your analysis of the speed, I imagine is what they say, but there you have it. The only other thing to bring up here are the other UFO sighting reports, or just we can mention the fact that there were UFO sighting reports, I suppose. You had a couple of interesting ones.
I have this from Paul Norman, who is the president of the Victorian UFO Research Society in Australia.
Paul?
Paul.
Oh, Paul Norman. Yes, indeed.
Who was a UFO researcher.
Right.
And he said that 6 weeks prior, they were getting all sorts of calls. They were seeing an increase in reports of objects and erratic moving lights. And as I mentioned earlier, it was increasing so much so, up until that point, where up until when this happened, their phones were ringing off the hook. They couldn't even leave them, and they were behind in the investigations because there were so many calls. So yeah, he says they reached a peak that weekend that he disappeared.
And there were reports of green lights.
Were there not?
Yeah,
well,
there were a couple.
Well, yeah, this is erratic moving bright lights.
Right.
But also something really important that I just found right before we went on here was something that Steve Roby said. He said 5 days later, he was working again in air traffic control, and another light aircraft radioed him and reported that intensely bright lights passed him 3 times over at jet speed to the point where he felt he was forced to land.
Wow.
And he, jokingly said to the guy with him, like, oh God, here we go again. They thought it was going to be a repeat. So, there was definitely something going on in the area at that time. And then there were reports that continued on after.
Well, there's one I just want to mention here that that's part of the whole lore of this tragic disappearance. There were witnesses about near a place called Apollo Bay, Victoria, not that far in the big grand scheme of things, who said they saw a green, actually very close by, they saw a green light trailing or like right on top of Valentich's plane. They claimed to have seen his plane and said that he was in a steep dive at the time. So now the one thing about it that is noteworthy is that these reports were prior to the release of the transcript in 1982. Transcript which mentions the green light. That fact had not come out prior to 1982 publicly. So you do have people reporting a green light in that vicinity at that time. I would say that's definitely interesting and intriguing.
That is interesting. And then there's something else that was mentioned here. The last report by the last witness before this all happened was around Bass Strait. And this was from a man with 2 nieces and a son traveling in a car. Cape Otway. They saw both an aircraft and an object above it, a small craft and a large craft. The witnesses said they could see lights on the small craft and then the object above it. And if I remember this correctly, it was a situation where the kids were like, Dad, what's that? And he said, oh, that's an airplane. They said, no, above it. He said those are airplane lights, and the kids said no, above it. And
what if
so they all saw these 2. So
is this the same one? I wonder, is what I was just mentioning. Did they see it in a steep dive?
There was no mention in what I heard of a steep dive. Witnesses. So
very interesting. So that's basically the bare bones outline of the case. So you've got a couple of different explanations that people have put forward, like conventional explanations. So one is that he staged his own disappearance. One, it's been pointed out, like he would have had enough fuel to fly even 500 miles, 800 kilometers beyond Cape Otway if he had decided. So he had the ability to do it. And, the aircraft was not plotted on radar, apparently. So there are people who would even doubt, did he ever even get near Cape Otway, or not. There is one report, at least, that is available. I think MUFON on their website has this, that Melbourne police received reports of a light aircraft making some kind of mysterious landing not far from Cape Otway at around the same time as Valentich's disappearance.
I didn't find that.
I don't really know if that means
don't know.
anything, and I don't know what to make of it because I have no follow-up on that. So that's one, that he did his own disappearance. But again, as far as anything that anyone's been able to tell about Fred, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right. When they talked to all the people who personally knew him, as we said earlier, he didn't seem like a candidate for anything like that.
Now, there's another explanation that we actually looked into and asked a few of our aviating friends, is that Valentich became disoriented and was flying upside down.
Right.
So he thought what he thought he saw were actually his aircraft's lights reflected on the water, and then he would have crashed into the water. So first of all, this is aviation authorities looked into this and they ruled it out. And apparently the Cessna 182 has a high wing with a gravity-fed fuel system. So if it's upside down, the fuel's not going to get to it. It's going to be going against gravity.
So you could not do it.
You can't fly upside down for any prolonged period of time. And you'd think that Fred would have known.
Right. So, I think it was Micah who mentioned this to Rhonda, his girlfriend, fiance.
Yeah.
And she said she had flown with him where he was doing things like loop-de-loops and these different sort of maneuvers. And she said, you can tell when you're upside down. And in another blog I read where pilots were discussing this, they were saying, look, when you're upside down in an aircraft like that, you are hanging in your restraints.
Yeah, but I would have to think so.
So you know when you're upside down, you physiologically, your body registers that feeling. Can you get confused and disoriented? I'm sure.
Yeah.
But if you are flying upside down, you're hanging.
You're going to know it. You're going to know it.
But pilots do dispute this case.
Right.
So
we had one pilot friend who did say he thought it would be unlikely that in a small Cessna type aircraft you would fly upside down, but he thought actually it could be possible without realizing it if you weren't that experienced. But apparently Valentich's Cessna, it really would not have been possible just because of the design of the aircraft. So that's just a swing and a miss for that one. And then, actually there's another investigation, I think around the year 2000, that also said he had become disoriented and had engine and radio problems that caused him to crash. But, I don't see how that makes any sense. He didn't report any, what would be the nature of his disorientation? I guess they would just say, well, he just didn't seem to know where he was going and crashed.
Well, people,
but there's no accounting for the objects zooming around him.
That's
or
right.
The objects zooming around him. So you just ignore that, I suppose.
I think that's the problem here. In a lot of the skeptics apparently produce some, very interesting arguments, but they don't account for the personal references and they don't account for what he said. They absolutely do not account for that. And
that goes with the suicide explanation as well, which doesn't really strike me. Then you've got the an analysis by Joe Nickel and James McGaha. They're very well-known skeptics of UFOs. Actually met McGaha in person one time a number of years ago, and I'm just going to say, wasn't very impressed. So if you're listening, Mr. McGaha, there you go. But anyway, I'm just telling you the truth. He and Nickel did they actually went through this period where they try to explain every single UFO encounter. They try to do the Exeter case of 1965, also lame, by the way. But they try to do this one. And they just said, look, Valentich was not an experienced pilot, which, okay, that's true. He wasn't an experienced pilot. And then they said was deceived by believing that by seeing a tilted horizon, and they thought that he tried to compensate by seeing the illusion of a tilted horizon, and that he attempted to compensate by inadvertently putting his plane into a downward spiral. They call it a graveyard spiral, which he initially mistook for a simple orbiting of the plane. And then they said, as the spiral tightened, the G forces would decrease the fuel flow. That would have explained the rough idling that he reported. And then the coup de grace was what Valentich saw. They actually suggested were the planets Venus, Mars, and Mercury, which were close together, along with the very bright star Antares, which they said that would have been very consistent with his description. That's their explanation.
Well, that's not consistent with his description at all of, orbiting him, circling around him, speeding past him.
Green light.
Right.
Metallic.
What they said prior to that about the suicide
Hovering.
role, I read from some pilots, they do believe that is possible, what they said about that.
Right.
But the second part, to say it's a closed case, the third part, to say it's a closed case because it matches what he said in the transcript. I mean, we all just went over the transcript, and that does not sound anything like what he said.
No, I think that just seems like a total reach. And I mean, just explaining it for the sake of explaining it.
I just wrote these down when you read them. Long shape. Okay, first of all, no. Right. It has such speed. No.
Right.
Chasing me. No.
Right.
It is orbiting on top of me. Green light. So, and that was those are only just a few things.
No, those are perfect. And I think, if you want to cherry pick any data, you can come up with any explanation you want. It's great to cherry pick. You just pick the data you want and throw away the rest.
Right.
That's wonderful. So that makes life a lot easier. Just pick the data you want to look at and don't look at the data you don't want to look at. So sure, go ahead. Right? I mean, that's what they do.
Well, yeah,
that's what they're doing.
We need to take into account everything. And I don't believe they interviewed any of the family or Rhonda either. So,
yeah. So I mean, that's really what you're looking at. And then, of course, you're left with, well, what does it look like it could be? Could it be that there's an unknown object, an actual aerial vehicle that indeed Fred Valentich was describing? And I keep coming back to it. And one of the things that I always love to do is to provide context and to look at the context, the big picture. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, here's a nice picture. I think we have one of Fred and his and Rhonda. Let me just show this before this is a plaque that is dedicated to Fred Valentich at or near the scene, I believe. And this is him with Rhonda. It's a nice picture of the two of them, not long before his tragic disappearance and presumed death. But anyway, what I was going to say is the 1978 was a massive year of UFO sightings. Now, a lot of skeptics have pointed out that this was the immediate aftermath of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Steven Spielberg. And that movie had a huge impact on global culture. It really was a big, big, big movie. And they said like there was this cultural phenomenon of people just looking for UFOs and seeing them. And I would say that there's a partial truth to that. Like with a heightened consciousness of the phenomenon, you will get more people looking at the sky. And guess what? If you actually go out to look for UFOs, if a lot of people do it, you are going to be more likely to see them, because guess what? The simplest way to go see a UFO is get a dog. Like, I cannot tell you how many times, if you read UFO reports, someone says, I was out walking my dog. Well, guess what? You're outside. And so you have an opportunity to look up at the sky. People with hot tubs also. Now, that's a smaller percentage because not many people have hot tubs. But it's a remarkably high number of UFO witnesses. And then the other one, which I wouldn't recommend you do, but are smoking. A lot of people will write in UFO
people who
reports.
Just happen to be outside, you mean?
I was having a cigarette and I'm outside, because that's where people nowadays will go. Very few people smoke inside. You go outside. And so you're out and you're looking at the sky and you see a UFO. Those three things are proof. The way to look at a UFO is just to be outside and look up at the sky with some regularity. And in the aftermath of the Spielberg movie, there were more sightings. However, here's where the skeptical explanation really falls apart. You look at the details of many of those UFO encounters, and there is no way you're going to lay these at the feet of Steven Spielberg. I'm really sorry, but no way. Not just the Valentich case. And is anyone seriously saying, "Oh yeah, he was like having an illusion by the movie Close Encounters"?
Yeah, people were actually saying that he was doing a reenactment of this.
Yeah. One of the episodes of Skeptoid, I know it's unfortunate. That was not the best moment, in my opinion, to make this as an explanation that he was, maybe enamored of the movie and wanted to recreate one of the scenes in there, and then just got disoriented and actually died.
People could say whatever they want, but again, have you talked to the people closest to him, like Rhonda, who spent all this time with him, who said no, he wasn't. They twisted his words in the official report that everyone is drawing these conclusions.
We haven't talked to these people either, but at least we're trying to listen to them.
Yeah.
So that there is that. So where was so that was the context of 1978, and there was just an enormous number of really good military reports of UFOs that year, and a large number of reported encounters with non-human beings. It was actually one author called it the year of the humanoid. Back then in the 70s, they were still using that phrase instead of alien. But anyway, so that's really, I think that's everything that we've got on the Valentich in terms of our notes.
Can we just say that Philip Klass got involved in this case? One of the biggest debunkers. And I'm going to say something. I feel like whenever Klass is involved in debunking a case, we should look at the case.
Oh, well.
It seems like it's a good case. It's actually worthy of our attention. It's almost like a marker. If he was there, we should look at it.
It's an amazing thing. If just to talk, we should bring Kathleen Marden back on and have her talk about Philip Klass. She's really become more knowledgeable of him than any of the living researchers.
She did so much research on him.
But skeptics should be ashamed. I mean, honestly, ashamed that he's one of them. I mean, when you look back over the career of this man, you see the mendacity. It wasn't even just intellectual midgetness, which, is that a word? It's intellectual midgetry. But it was the duplicity, the dishonesty. I mean, he was a deeply dishonest researcher. And he had debunking explanations for any case that got any kind of prominence. Klass went after it, and a lot of his tactics were just to smear the witness. He did that as a regular course of action. It was really, base, a low level. I mean, what you'd expect from a true lowlife. And honestly, that just is what he was. And he had all of this status. He would get op-ed pieces in the New York Times, and major media just had him on all the time for these UFO TV specials and the like, and he got way more attention than he deserved. So that's a whole other episode.
And I just want to address, how the skeptics were saying that he was possibly very disoriented, and that this is how this happened, that he ended up killing himself. And, so in an article later, they asked Steve Roby, who was the air traffic controller, the last person to ever speak to him,
right?
Who we were describing in the transcripts. They asked him, you were the one who heard his voice. You were the one who was talking to him. Did he sound disoriented to you?
Right.
And so he said he wasn't disoriented when he spoke to me.
He was not.
He wasn't.
He seemed clear-headed.
He said he sounded matter-of-fact and genuine, definitely not disoriented. So, we have to put some weight into that. It doesn't mean he's the end all, but he at this moment is really one of the only people who it's probably burned in his mind. He was there and he goes over this incident all the time.
He must. What
he's been
chilling,
in documentaries and he's spoken about this, that, he thinks about it. So, and Roby, I think I mentioned this before, he's also a pilot, air traffic controller and a pilot. And he says that he does not believe that Valentich confused the lights with bright stars, a meteorite shower, or that he was inverted. So that's just his opinion.
Great. Thanks for mentioning that. It's an amazing case. And after it's been 41 years. We just passed the 41st anniversary of it not long ago. About
October 21st.
2 weeks ago. Yeah, I feel kind of a real closeness to this case in some ways. He was almost my age. Fred Valentich was 4 years older than me. And his girlfriend, Rhonda, I think is exactly like my age. Like this is my generation. These are my people. And I just, I've always felt a certain, it's an intellectually interesting case, but it's an emotional case.
Yeah.
And I've always felt for these people. It's a very and for his father, Guido, who's done a number of interviews, and it's just hard to lose your son like that. It's an awful thing, or your sibling or your brother.
And I think it's really sad how they sort of portrayed his father. Whenever they bring him up in terms of sounding like a crazy UFO believer, because I guess his father made some statements about,
at one point,
hoping that his son had been abducted, sort of holding out hope
taken
for that.
rather than dead.
Of course, though, if if this is your child, you're going to be holding out hope in some sort of way like this. So, but it just seems like they went through so much ridicule, as opposed to the way you would think that the media and this initial government investigation should have taken it. The way they should have respected it.
There is a real difference. If people really think there has been no change in how our broader culture has dealt with the UFO phenomenon, look no further than this case. It's not like the Valentich family were actually ridiculed. That would be going too far. But the people close to Fred were not. They didn't really seem to be taken as seriously as they should have been.
Right.
And I would say that type of attitude by the major media would be considered very heavy-handed today. It's not that the major media has done a complete 180. They certainly have not, but it's not the same as it was in the 1970s or 80s. It's definitely not the same. We have seen changes happen in the broader culture, and I think those changes are continuing to happen. So it's slow. It's very, very painstakingly slow, but there are changes. So we've been going a little more than an hour. I think, are we going to close to wrap this up?
I think we will.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a sad end. Nothing was ever found.
Nothing definitive, and certainly his body was never found.
So it's an ongoing missing persons case.
Right.
And
there you go. And probably will always remain that. I doubt that this case will ever get a definitive resolution. It just seems like it's too much time has passed.
Wouldn't it be amazing, though, if somehow we could hear the original footage, the unedited version of it?
That's a very bizarre thing, that you've got a situation where the transcript is edited.
Right off.
Like, why?
Right out of the gate, yeah.
Seriously, why?
Suspicious.
Yeah, that's very, very odd. This is not ostensibly a case of national security, right?
Right.
Why should it be? UFOs don't exist. So why is there a need to hide any of this transcript? That's very bizarre.
Before we wrap up, I'm going to read a couple questions here. Let's see.
Questions. Not questions.
Yes.
All right.
Let's see. Rodney Boyer, Richard and Tracey, has anyone ever done any underwater searching for this plane? With side scan radar, just wondering if you had any information on that topic.
I don't.
We don't. However, do you want to mention James Goodall made a comment about this was a hot spot for USOs.
Yeah, well, I was just in communication with James Goodall. We ran into him about, was it 2 months ago?
At
an
UFO
event.
Congress.
So if you don't,
Phoenix.
James Goodall is a legendary aviation journalist. I mean, this is a guy who back in the 1980s and 90s was working the Area 51 beat. Before the world knew about Bob Lazar, James Goodall was investigating Area 51, and not as a UFO guy, by the way, but as an aviation, black budget, black world type of a guy who was looking into, all the stealth fighter, stealth bomber stuff, but even beyond that, flying triangles, the TR-3B, and all of that. He's an amazing guy, absolutely amazing guy. So we're going to probably do an interview with James in the near future for the Richard Dolan show, which I'm excited about. But so this morning we're working on this, and you thought, hey, write to Goodall.
Yeah, I said, we were talking about him, and I said, write him, ask him what he thinks about
Well,
this.
that's actually a good idea. So I did send off an email to James about the Valentich case. Like, just what do you think about it?
He said he had just been reviewing it again, actually.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, of course, he knew about it. And he shoots back and says, look, there are lots of reports of USOs, objects coming out of the water at that time. And I don't know how much he knows about it, but he certainly struck me as someone who'd really been looking into it. So there's that. That's an interesting little
Well, this
side
area also has a nickname of the Devil's Triangle, kind of like the Bermuda Triangle. It is actually known for several craft going missing there. I mean, ships, vessels going missing there. And even there's a case where 2 rescue planes went to look for a vessel that was missing, and the planes went missing.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So, there's another
Bizarre.
mystery there to that whole geographic region. So we have Jim Hale next.
Any other questions here? Okay.
Yes. Hi, y'all. Tracey, have either you or Richard heard of a mathematician named Donald Hoffman who's working on conscious realism? He made a statement about SETI, which I think might interest you both.
I'm not familiar with it. Are you?
No, not at all.
We don't get out much. There's a lot that I don't
But
know.
that sounds really interesting.
So let's make a note of it.
Yeah.
By the way, one thing that if you ever, any of you watching this, ever get yourself in front of a camera and you're being interviewed and someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer to it, best thing you can say is, I don't know. Like, don't pretend. Don't pretend that you know. Like, that's a bad road to go down. You don't want to do that. I learned long early on in this field, thank goodness, don't do that, because all you end up doing is embarrassing yourself. Just, it's okay not to know. And so I don't know about this
to
guy.
our friend Jim.
Yeah,
don't
there
know.
you go. Okay, maybe 1 or 2 more.
Kentucky Man, Mr. Dolan, did you check with Keith Basterfield in Adelaide for the official files?
No, unfortunately, I didn't. I'd be happy to. I just did a brief correspondence with Keith not long ago. He does fantastic work. He's really one of the most important UFO researchers we have out there. I just love what he does. He's so low key. He doesn't get worked up, but he's, you know what I mean? He doesn't get like emotional, but he's an excellent researcher, and that would be good. Maybe I will ask him about that. I'm interested in that. Next.
This is just a comment from Randy McNally. Hey, Richard and Tracey, great show. I live and have lived less than 20 miles from Loring Air Force Base. I remember the UFOs over the runway very distinctly. Also, many sightings of my own during those years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because we were talking about Loring not too long ago.
You bet.
Lots of action there. So that's interesting.
I'll just say, so for those of you, I think we must have covered Loring in one of our programs.
Oh, no, we did it. Twice.
Yeah, so that was back in 1975, only 3 years apart from the Valentich case. 1975 was a huge year of UFO sightings, particularly in the United States, particularly in the whole second half of the year, but actually the entire year. And over at Loring, which is in the northern part of Maine, very close to the border with Canada, there were several nights of UFO sightings that were absolutely off the charts, astonishing, inexplicable. I don't see how a debunker can take care of these cases in any way. I don't see how you could debunk them as anything mundane. So yeah, and I was aware, I'm sure many people are aware that Loring had a long history of many of these types of encounters, not just those 2 nights in October of 1975, but in fact, many, many other cases. But not all of them are official. Just a lot of folks report these to researchers later, and people collect them, but there's a lot. And in fact, on a lot of blog sites, gosh, I wish I could remember these more specifically, but I recall reading a number of cases, accounts by military people who were at Loring back in the mid-'70s, and they had their own UFO stories to tell. They're out there. So, okay, what else? I'm always in favor of wrapping it up. I like the wrap up. What do you say?
Yeah, let's do the wrap up.
I think we should, because otherwise we just keep going.
Keep going. Yeah, there's other little details out there. I mean, obviously we didn't get every single little thing, but it is a fascinating case. And there was a book that I came across. I was actually just looking for the name of that book. I think it's called Devil's Meridian. It was written in the 1980s. I think that was mentioned on the Gralien Report.
Again, Micah Hanks.
Yeah. And it is an excellent account of what was going on at that time. It goes into great details about that account, this case.
The Valentich case.
Apparently, if you really want to do a deep dive, that's one place to go. And if you want to listen to the podcast that I'm referring to that talks about it, you can look it up, Gralien Report. Just look up Valentich, and it was October 2014, I believe.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Mike is a good buddy of ours, so always happy to give him a shout out. He's a great guy and an excellent researcher, and really fun to talk to. I've done a number of interviews with Micah Hanks, so I'm glad he did that interview with Rhonda Rushing. Yeah,
he got really into that case. So he even lectured. Yeah. He said he lectured about the case, and he spent a lot of time talking to her. So he has, really good sort of follow-up details, to the original. So, you can take into account some of that, some Keith Basterfield, all these things. Yeah. And there's a lot of information out there to go through.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's it for now.
Not so dry as the skeptics make it sound.
No way.
Yeah.
Again, I'm always bemused when, not just in this case, but in so many of these UFO cases after the fact, someone comes along decades later, generations later, and they have this pretense of having solved it. It's like, stop the presses. I got this. It's like, you don't got this. You don't have this, usually, I should say. But people love to toss out their own little theories. And again, it's a matter of, at least in my observation, force-fitting the facts to fit their preconceived thesis. And I just think, why not just acknowledge that you can't figure this out? Like, why do you have to? But, Alan Hynek always had this expression to describe those types of people. He'd always say their attitude is, it can't be, therefore it isn't. And I think that applies just as much today to some of these people. Like, it can't be, it's impossible, therefore it isn't, therefore any amount of mental gymnastics I go through will be better than accepting what the facts appear to tell me. That's really what it comes down to me, in my opinion anyway. All right, are we ready to say goodbye? Are we going to do this? Are we doing this every week or not every week? Should we just say this?
Okay, let's talk about it.
Well, because
for a minute.
It's actually hard for us to do this every week live stream. We want to do this every week live stream. At the same time, I do the UFOs, the big picture, the solo Saturday live stream. And I still am committed to doing interviews with Richard Dolan's show, which, by the way, I've got a bunch lined up. Haven't done any lately. Haven't done many lately. Got a lot that will be
in the near future. There's a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, they're exciting ones. But anyway,
we have a whole new series
the
coming
point,
out as well.
The point is, right, it's just a lot. It's a lot to prepare. And sometimes we can't always easily do this every week.
It's tough.
So we've just been wondering, what's the optimal way for us to do this? We are obviously going to keep doing this. Actually, I really love doing this. And you're just awesome to work with. I love doing this with you.
Aw.
Yeah. That's
Thank you. I love
moment.
doing this with you too. I mean, and I love the whole atmosphere we have with the whole chat family is here. We've got Pursuing X here. I have you here.
Yeah. It's all good.
It's fun.
But doing it every week is tough. So please have a little bit of sympathy for us if we can't do it every single week. We will do our best. We're still trying to figure this out, but we're not going away. We're not going anywhere. Just letting you know, sometimes it's tough to do it every week.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
But anyway, this has been fun, and we'll see what we do for next week. And if not next week, then definitely the week after. We'll be on a semi-regular basis with all of this.
Yep.
Right. All right.
And if you're going to be in Manchester on December 7th, maybe we'll see you
Look us up.
Yeah.
Definitely want to thank Pursuing X. Those are our peeps, man. And if you're wondering what Pursuing X is about, we get a lot of our stuff done in terms of YouTube, and actually much more because we have their help. They have been with us now for about 1.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we can mention their names, right?
Yeah.
Lori and Michael. We love them. They're great. And I just want them to know personally that I appreciate them and we appreciate them. We both do.
Yeah.
So, all right. That's it. I guess we'll just see you all next week.
Yep.
Or sometime soon. And I don't know. I don't really have a tagline for this show like I do for the other shows.
Well, I will just say this. Well, let's just end on this. Since we are talking about doing this, sort of balancing out our schedule a little bit, it will be very helpful if you have notifications on. I know people have said they don't always work. The YouTube notifications don't always work. But what we have noticed just as of late is that sometimes they will come 10 minutes after a live show starts, or we upload something. So this is, they do come, they do work. If yours doesn't work, I don't know what's going on, but
YouTube's a little buggy, and it's not just with us. They do this with a lot of other content creators. So you can't prove a conspiracy by YouTube, but it is possible. You never know. What are they up to?
But most of the time, the notifications work. So it really helps us out by subscribing to the channel. And if you turn on notifications, that's something that helps you so that you know that everything, every time we upload something new. So.
And we also just want to thank a few of our buddies who are in the chat room who are there to help us out. Kirsten is there. I'm not sure if Mark H is there. He's there a lot of times.
Yep.
And we have people out there.
We have all our regulars. I can see you in there right now.
Just want to say thanks to all of you guys for being here with us every week. It means a lot, and makes it a little bit nicer and easier for us to do this as well.
It does. Feels like we have a family here with us. It's really fun. So.
All right, everyone, have a great evening, great day, whatever it is you're doing, and we will catch you next time. Later.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night.